Hi there. I'd like to talk about the book Hitler's Death by Luke Daly Groves. Now, this book was based on his dissertation for his degree and his subsequent research in his postgraduate studies as a historian. And really, it's a response to some of the popular views about Hitler's death or his survival, because there's a lot of material in the popular media which claim that Hitler survived World War II and was living in anywhere from Chile to the Arctic to Japan to the United States. And more recently there's been TV shows which are quasi-documentaries which actually state that Hitler did survive the bunker. So the book investigates based on evidence from a historian's point of view, because historians don't really generally get into the business of debunking popular myths. It's not really in their wheelhouse. However, it may be thought necessary that some good scholarly research should be shone on some of this stuff, and that's what Luke has done. Okay, so Adolf Hitler died in the bunker on the 30th of April 1945. I think that can be really quoted as a fact. He apparently shot himself, and he gave poison to Eva Braun, who was his wife. He'd married her shortly before. Now, apart from eyewitness testimony, the author goes into the psychological and political reasons why Hitler committed suicide. He wrote a kind of last testament which plainly said he was going to die in Berlin and his wife was going to die, and I think that was written the day before, and he had seen some of his most faithful followers, for example Himmler, who had throughout the war been his most faithful of his supporters, had deserted him. Even his brother-in-law, Hermann Fegelein of the SS, an SS officer, had deserted and was executed. And Hermann Goering, head of Luftwaffe, had tried to usurp Hitler's position, and Hitler ordered him to be arrested. So out of the main inner circle of Nazis, there was only really Goebbels and Bormann. And Hitler reckoned that the German people didn't deserve him anymore. Also, he was terrified of being captured by the Soviets, and rightly so. So he committed suicide, and his body was burnt under the direction of Otto Gunsch, who was his adjutant slash bodyguard, in the garden of the bunker. So how do we know this? Well, very early on in May, there was a group of intelligence officers, both British and American, who started investigating straight away, and that was their conclusion. But then, for a number of reasons, there was a more directed investigation done by British intelligence, and it was led by Hugh Trevor Roper, who had been, or was currently, an SIS officer, but his background was a historian. And he was the leading expert on German intelligence organizations, who would have been the people involved in any escape attempt by Hitler. So, using his dual background as a historian and an intelligence officer and analysing information, he did a lot of first-hand interviews with people who were there. He had access to documentation and lots of interrogations, and put it all together. And the events are more or less as we've just described. And he wrote the book, The Last Days of Hitler. He amended it a little bit later when some people were released from Soviet imprisonment and were able to give their accounts, but they only added to the story, they didn't contradict it. So quite early on, the truth was known. However, a lot of disinformation was being pumped out by the Soviets because they wanted to destabilize the relationship and make it appear that Hitler had been given shelter by either the Americans or the British. So they kept poking the fire on that. And coupled with sensational journalism and people peddling rumours. So that went on, and till fairly recently it was still going on. So there's kind of an analogy with what happened to Martin Bormann. Now, a group who were probably the last people to escape from the bunker, there was a tunnel to Friedrichstrasse station, then over the Wiedendamer Bridge, and then the group split. And when Arthur Axmann, who'd been head of the Hitler Youth, turned back because there was a Soviet patrol, he saw his companions had been killed, and there were two bodies outside Lehrter station. So it's a single source account, but that Bormann was dead. British intelligence concluded he was dead and were of that opinion for all time, really. However, they kept getting requests from various bodies and various people and the Foreign Office and so on to investigate rumours that Bormann was alive in numerous countries. And the book quotes a lot of the replies that were generated within either MI5 or MI6, and they're very witty. And you know, it shows that they were completely skeptical about any of this stuff. But you know, it was a waste of time. And then, of course, eventually it was found out. Even though when I grew up, a popular opinion in kind of books and newspapers was that Bormann was alive and he was living in probably Argentina. But then it was found conclusively that there was a body dug up at Lehrter station, and DNA proved it was Bormann. He never got further than that. So even though there was all this evidence coming out about Bormann, it was all absolutely just fantasy. And similarly with Hitler. Now, more recently, there was a book, Grey Wolf, and that's trolled back over all the stuff, including there was a pilot, a Luftwaffe pilot, who claimed he flew Hitler to Denmark, but that was totally discredited at the time. So there was no truth in that. Hannah Reich, who was a pilot, who was kind of Hitler's favourite pilot, she had landed a Fiesler Stork aircraft near to the bunker and pleaded with Hitler to allow her to fly him out. And he declined. He more or less gave his, reiterated his commitment to die in the bunker. And she was given permission to fly away, which she did, and that was probably the last aircraft to leave Berlin. Now, she is quoted in The Last Days of Hitler, but then Grey Wolf dug up an interview with her where she said that Hugh Trevor Roper had never interrogated her, And this was true because she had been a prisoner in the American zone, and Trevor Roper hadn't been given access to her, but he'd sent a brief over um, for the interrogators to ask a series of questions, and they returned the brief to him, and that's what he included in his book. So, attempts to discredit in that way failed. So, I've seen I saw a chap on Joe Rogan talking about a TV series he was involved in, where he was stating with conviction that Hitler had definitely gotten to Argentina. Now, the author of this book, Luke Daly Groves, I saw him on a podcast, and one of the guys on the podcast was James Holland, who had been involved in this program, this historical documentary. And James Holland said, I got involved in it. He said, because it gave me an opportunity. They would take me to various interesting places associated with the war, which I wanted to research. He said, but I only took part on the condition that I never had to say that Hitler had lived. So there you go. Even the people who taken part in the program were skeptical. So I've given only an overview of the book. It's very detailed, very readable, and it's full of fascinating information. Grey Wolf and other books quote FBI files, but all they were reports that people were submitting to the FBI, which the FBI themselves regarded as being fantasy, and were labelling them as such. But if you quote them out of context, this book Grey Wolf says that the FBI had hundreds of accounts of Hitler living in Argentina. Well, the FBI did, but they also had an equal number of accounts that he was living in another country. Take your pick. So they were all conflicting accounts, and a lot of them were from known fantasists. So, if you're interested in military history and you've read any of these books or you've seen any of the TV programs, have a look at this, because conspiracy theories can be fun, but it's really good to get to the truth as well.